Hello, everybody. I'm East Coast Pete. Welcome to my spin-off show. We're spinning off of Mid-Rock Crisis. The name of this segment is For Drummers Only. And today we're going to talk about Gene Krupa. Now, who is Gene Krupa and why is he important? Well, we're going back a long ways now, back into the 30s. He was born in 1909. Died in 1973. Gene Krupa, an American jazz drummer and band leader, an actor and composer. He may have been the first ever drum set drumming star. He put the drums in the front and center. It all began with his solo on Sing, Sing, Sing from 1937. It was a movie. Krupa is called the founding fathers of the modern drum set. He's from Chicago. His father was a Polish immigrant. His mom was also Polish but born in Pennsylvania. Gene was raised Catholic, and his parents would have liked for him to have become a priest. Grade school for Gene meant parochial school, and that meant nuns. Some of them pretty strict. Gene went to St. Joseph's College but dropped out after a year. No priesthood. Krupa's drum teacher was Sanford Moeller, also known as Gus Moeller, known for authoring the Moeller method, which taught snare drumming for the military. This meant that Gene, his pupil, was drilled and skilled in the rudiments which provided stick control and sight reading of flams, paradiddles, 5, 7, and 9 stroke rolls, and accents. All basic drumming techniques taught by drum teachers to beginning students of percussion to this day. To become a drum set drummer, playing professional with a band, one needs more than rudiments that were taught in the Civil War, because music has changed, and with each decade drummers would evolve with the music. In 1927, when Krupa made his first recordings, that meant big band jazz, New Orleans jazz, ragtime, and scat. Chicago-style jazz incorporated swing and jazz, and it was danceable. Improvisation was finding its jazz footing, and even classical composers such as Maurice Ravel included the new music in their modern compositions. Krupa's playing was fresh, but he did not become well known until he joined Benny Goodman's band in 1934. Krupa formed his own orchestra 4 years later. In 1941, Krupa appeared in the film Ball of Fire, where he played his hit Drum Boogie, sung by Barbara Stanwyck, dubbed by Martha Tilton. Obviously, Barbara Stanwyck was not doing the singing, but I guarantee you that Gene Krupa was doing the drumming. Unfortunately, Krupa was arrested for possession of pot, and that meant his band was finished, and Krupa returned to Benny Goodman's band for a year. The difference in music from the 40s to the 50s was that big bands pared down to 8-piece bands, quartets, and trios. Krupa was being left behind by the new bebop music, cool jazz that required less athletic theatrics and more steady brushwork as drums moved back behind the piano and the contrabass and whatever lead instruments were available, like trumpet or saxophone. Drums were definitely in the background again. Chicago blues was becoming more mainstream, but none of these forms allowed for the flamboyance that Krupa was known for. There was still a market for big band music. In New York City nightclubs, Gene Miller was peaking, Count Basie was flourishing, and Django Reinhardt was retiring. Miles Davis was up and coming, the face of jazz, and Little Richard was busy inventing rock and roll. If Krupa's aching back would have kept him from early retirement, his wild drumming still might have a renaissance in big band rock and roll. As it was, Krupa retired in the late 60s, opening a school of music. And Peter Criss of Kiss and Jerry Nolan of the New York Dolls were students at Gene Krupa's Music Academy. No, Peter Criss was not wearing makeup at the time. Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich played on the same stage at Carnegie Hall. The show was recorded and released by Verve in 1952, billed as the Drum Battle. Similar battles by the two were released as Krupa and Rich 1955 and Burning Beat in 1962. Krupa died in New York City of heart failure. He was 64 in 1973. He also had emphysema and leukemia. Well, back in 1930, Krupa endorsed the new Slingerland drums, a rival for Ludwig, also based in Chicago. Krupa suggested that Slingerland produced tom-toms with tunable top and bottom heads. And Krupa's use of tom-toms in his music was the beginning of all drum companies expanding their drum sets, sometimes to sets with 10 or 12 tom-toms, and this was back in the 30s. Krupa also collaborated with Avitas Zildjian to develop the hi-hat, as well as specific cymbals for ride, crash, and splash cymbals. Krupa was one of the first jazz drummers to use a foot pedal to play the bass drum. Now, in Krupa's discography, it includes 24 albums featuring drums and collaboration with Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, and Benny Goodman, and Harry James. The Gene Krupa Story, a film starring Sal Mineo in 1959, came out. Krupa appeared in films The Glenn Miller Story and The Benny Goodman Story in 1954. Now, about Krupa's arrest and 3-month imprisonment in 1943. He was also accused of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, a crime for which he was exonerated when it was discovered that he had been framed by federal agents who paid the key witness to lie about his age. What could the feds have against a guy like Gene Krupa? Were they music critics? Was Krupa too cool for school? Was it some kind of Elvis thing about playing music associated with black people? Was Krupa the first jazz musician to smoke dope? Hardly. Pot wasn't illegal until 1937, when FDR signed the Marijuana Tax Act, which was repealed by Congress in 1970, but stayed illegal with the passage of the Controlled Substance Act, which is still on the books. And pot is still illegal federally, even in several states that have decriminalized it. So, you drummers, you owe this guy. You know how they say people who are accomplished in this life are standing on the shoulders of giants? Well, that's what we're talking about. These are guys that came up with all kinds of new ways of doing things, all kinds of new music. It's all part of music history. A drummer should have at least an inkling of how it all came about. So that's what this show is going to be about, providing drummers from the past and the present, their abilities, their talent, their likes and dislikes, and hopefully I'll be able to clear up some mysteries that may abound. Thank you for being with me on For Drummers Only. See you next time. Bye now. Take good care.